And when my sister walked through the door on Sunday, it was like an angel literally was sent to that door. And even though I said out loud, don't call the cops, because he did if I called the cops. And I didn't want him to hurt her because he had her cornered in the doorway, you know.
This is Dominick Calhoun, a vibrant little boy with a contagious laugh and a love for life. He was a child who should be out exploring the world, chasing butterflies in sun-drenched fields, building sandcastles on the beach, and filling his days with the boundless joy and wonder of childhood. But tragically, his journey was cut short, his light extinguished far too soon, his laughter silenced forever. This is not just a picture, it's a descent into the abyss of a nightmare. A place where the sanctity of childhood was violated, where innocence was brutally stolen, and where hope itself perished. This is the story of Dominick Calhoun, a story of unimaginable cruelty inflicted upon a defenseless child, a story of missed opportunities by those who should have protected him, and a desperate fight for justice in a world that failed to shield him from the darkness. Brace yourself, for this is not an easy story to hear, but it is a story that demands to be told, a story that yearns to be heard, a story that cries out for justice. Dominic entered the world on October 17, 2005, in Grand Blanc, Michigan, born to Corinne Baker and Eric Calhoun. He was a beloved younger brother to Tyler Baker, Corinne's son from a previous relationship. From the start, Dominic radiated warmth and affection, his infectious laughter captivating everyone he met. He shared a special bond with his older half-brother, Tyler Baker, their camaraderie evident in the way they played and explored the world together. Dominic's love for life extended beyond his family, his gentle spirit drawing him to animals, particularly dogs. He found joy in simple pleasures. Fishing trips with his grandfather instilled in him a love for nature's tranquility, while his cherished toy tractor fueled countless imaginary adventures in the backyard. But beneath this idyllic exterior, cracks were beginning to show. Corinne, Dominic's mother, faced personal struggles that cast a shadow over their family life. The family experienced frequent moves and periods of instability, creating a sense of unease. It was during this tumultuous time that Brandon Hayes entered their lives. Hayes, a man with a troubled past and a penchant for violence, quickly established a volatile relationship with Corinne. Their connection was marked by turbulence and shrouded in a darkness that would soon cast a long shadow over Dominic's world. In the spring of 2010, Dominic's life took a devastating turn when he moved with Corinne and Brandon into this unassuming apartment complex. Little did anyone know, this seemingly ordinary dwelling would become the backdrop for a tragedy that would shatter lives and leave a community reeling. Within these walls, a nightmare was about to unfold, a nightmare that would expose the darkest depths of human cruelty and test the limits of compassion. What unfolded over the next 4 days was a descent into the depths of human depravity, a harrowing ordeal that no child should ever have to endure. It began with a seemingly insignificant incident, a small accident that ignited a terrifying chain of events. Dominic, innocently playing in the living room, wet his pants. Brandon Hayes, enraged by this minor mishap, unleashed a torrent of violence upon the defenseless 4-year-old. Day after day, the brutality escalated. Dominic, a child who loved Spider-Man and dancing to Michael Jackson, was now trapped in a terrifying reality. He was subjected to relentless abuse, beaten, burned, and tortured. His small body, once so full of life, became a canvas of pain and suffering. Brandon Hayes, fueled by a twisted rage, inflicted appalling cruelty upon Dominic. He burned the child's hands, the hands that once reached out for hugs and held his beloved toy trucks. He targeted his innocent eyes, the eyes that once sparkled with joy and curiosity. He repeatedly threw him against the walls, causing irreparable damage to his fragile body, the body that once danced with carefree abandon. Dominic's cries for help echoed the apartment, his small voice pleading for mercy. But his cries went unanswered. Corinne, his mother, was present throughout the ordeal, yet she did nothing to stop it. She was paralyzed by fear, her own safety taking precedence over the well-being of her child. Her silence was a betrayal, a devastating abandonment of her maternal duty. The details of Dominic's ordeal are harrowing, difficult to recount, yet essential to understanding the full extent of his suffering. He was kicked, punched, and choked. His teeth were shattered, his genitals targeted, and his head slammed against the floor. The savage nature of these attacks defied any rational explanation, revealing a darkness that chilled the hearts of even the most seasoned investigators. Dominic's world, once filled with the simple joys of childhood, became a terrifying prison. He was trapped in a cycle of abuse, his cries for help echoing unheard in the darkness. His once vibrant spirit was slowly crushed, replaced by fear, pain, and despair. The days blurred into an endless nightmare, each one bringing fresh horrors, each one pushing him closer to the brink. And yet, amidst this appalling suffering, there were glimmers of hope, missed opportunities for intervention, moments when Dominic's fate could have been altered. But these chances slipped away, one by one, leaving Dominic trapped in a nightmare that would ultimately claim his life. Dominic's story is a stark reminder that child abuse often lurks in the shadows, hidden in plain sight. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to be vigilant, to speak up when we suspect a child is in danger. It's a reminder that silence can be deadly, that inaction can have devastating consequences. Dominic's legacy lives on, not just in the hearts of those who loved him, but in the ongoing fight to protect children from abuse. His story, though filled with tragedy, serves as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, and that the fight for justice, though arduous, is always worth fighting. The tragedy of Dominick Calhoun's story is further compounded by the missed opportunities to intervene, the moments when his fate could have been altered, the people who could have stepped in to save him. But fear, apathy, and a misguided sense of loyalty allowed the abuse to continue, to escalate, to ultimately claim Dominic's life. Corinne's sister, Christina, visited the apartment and saw Dominic's battered and bruised form. She pleaded with Corinne to seek help, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Corinne, paralyzed by fear and manipulated by Brandon, chose to protect her abuser rather than her own child. She dismissed his injuries, claiming he was simply asleep. But deep down, she knew the truth. She knew the extent of his suffering, and she knew she was failing him. Even Brandon's own family members witnessed the horrific abuse. His father, Arnold Hayes, and his uncle, Rodney Hayes, saw Dominic's injuries firsthand. They urged Corinne to take him to the hospital, but she refused, her fear of Brandon outweighing her concern for her son. Rodney Hayes even confronted Corinne privately, begging her to seek help, but she remained silent, her loyalty to her abuser tragically misplaced. Neighbors, too, heard Dominic's cries for help. They heard the sounds of violence erupting from the apartment, the unmistakable sounds of a child in distress. But fear, apathy, and a misguided sense of responsibility kept them from intervening. They convinced themselves it was none of their business, that someone else would surely step in. But no one did. Even those who had the power to help, those entrusted with the responsibility of protecting children, failed Dominic. Child Protective Services had been alerted to concerns about Dominic's well-being in the past, but their investigations were inconclusive. They failed to recognize the imminent danger he was in, the escalating abuse that would ultimately claim his life. Dominic's paternal grandfather, Rick Calhoun, loved his grandson dearly. He cherished the moments they spent together, fishing, playing, and simply enjoying each other's company. But even he was unaware of the horrors unfolding in Dominic's life. He trusted Corinne, he trusted the system, and he paid a devastating price for that trust. These missed opportunities, these failed responsibilities, this collective silence allowed the abuse to continue, to escalate, to ultimately take Dominic's life. This is not just a story of one man's cruelty, it's a story of a system's failure, a community's apathy, and a mother's tragic betrayal. It's a story that demands accountability, a story that compels us to ask ourselves, what if someone had spoken up? What if someone had intervened? What if someone had simply cared enough to protect a defenseless child? Dominic's suffering went unheeded, and for that, a little boy paid the ultimate price. I know this was a heavy one, but these stories need to be told. If you're feeling it, give this video a thumbs up and share it to spread awareness. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our true crime community. For those of you who've been here a while, you know I appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around. On April 11, 2010, the nightmare reached its devastating climax. Christina Baker, Corinne's sister, arrived at the apartment with friends to purchase marijuana. This transaction would inadvertently expose the unimaginable suffering inflicted upon Dominic. The sight that greeted them was one of sheer horror. Dominic, his small body battered and broken, lay barely conscious on his bed. Corinne, in a desperate attempt to conceal the truth, claimed Dominic was merely sleeping. But Christina, recognizing the gravity of the situation, immediately contacted Dominic's paternal grandfather, Rick Calhoun. Rick Calhoun rushed to the apartment, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The scene that unfolded before him was one he would never forget. His beloved grandson, Dominic, lay on the blood-soaked bedding, his tiny body ravaged by abuse. The sight was too much for Rick to bear. He immediately contacted the authorities, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the scene, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Even seasoned officers, accustomed to the horrors of the world, were shaken to their core by the sight of Dominic's broken body. Dominic was rushed to Hurley Medical Center, his life hanging precariously in the balance. Doctors fought tirelessly to save him, but the extent of his injuries was simply too severe. He had sustained massive brain swelling, requiring a portion of his skull to be removed in a desperate attempt to alleviate the pressure. But it was too late. Dominic's fragile body, ravaged by days of relentless abuse, could no longer sustain him. On April 12, 2010, surrounded by his heartbroken family, Dominick Calhoun was taken off life support. His short life, filled with so much promise and potential, had been brutally extinguished. The news of Dominic's death sent shockwaves through the community. How could such a horrific crime happen to an innocent child? How could a mother stand by and watch as her own son was tortured to death? The questions were endless, the answers elusive. But one thing was certain: justice would be sought for Dominick Calhoun. Brandon Hayes, the perpetrator of this heinous crime, was arrested and charged with Dominic's murder. He faced a litany of charges including first-degree felony murder, torture, and child abuse. The jury swiftly returned with a guilty verdict on all counts. Brandon Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his fate sealed forever. Justice had been served, but it could not bring Dominic back. It could not erase the pain and suffering he had endured. It could not restore the innocence that had been stolen from him. Corinne Baker, Dominic's mother, also faced charges for her role in her son's death. She was charged with second-degree murder and second-degree child abuse, her inaction and complicity contributing to Dominic's tragic fate. She accepted a plea deal, admitting her guilt and agreeing to testify against Brandon Hayes. In exchange, she received a sentence of 13 to 30 years in prison. While some argued that her sentence was too lenient, others believed that she, too, was a victim of Brandon Hayes' manipulation and abuse. Regardless of the differing opinions, one thing was clear: Corinne Baker would forever bear the burden of her son's death, a heavy weight that would follow her for the rest of her days. Dominic's death left a void in the lives of those who loved him, a void that could never be filled. His family, friends, and community mourned the loss of a bright light, a child whose potential would never be realized. But Dominic's legacy would not be defined by his tragic death. His story would serve as a catalyst for change, a reminder that we must all be vigilant in protecting the most vulnerable among us. Dominic's death sent shockwaves far beyond the confines of his community, sparking outrage and a collective cry for change. It ignited a firestorm of debate, forcing society to confront the uncomfortable truth about child abuse, that it often lurks in the shadows, hidden in plain sight, and that far too often, those who have the power to intervene remain silent. But amidst the grief and despair, a beacon of hope emerged. Dominic's grandfather, Rick Calhoun, a man shattered by the loss of his beloved grandson, refused to let his death be in vain. He channeled his grief into action, becoming a tireless advocate for change. Rick Calhoun embarked on a crusade, determined to ensure that no other child would suffer the same fate as Dominic. He became a vocal and passionate advocate for legislative reform, tirelessly lobbying lawmakers and raising public awareness about the urgent need for stronger protections. He shared Dominic's story with anyone who would listen, his voice filled with both anguish and determination. He spoke at rallies, conferences, and legislative hearings, his words echoing the silent cries of countless children trapped in abusive situations. Rick Calhoun's efforts, fueled by his unwavering love for Dominic, began to gain traction. Lawmakers, moved by his story and the public outcry for change, took notice. They recognized the urgent need for legislative reform, the need to strengthen penalties for child abuse and create new protections for vulnerable children. In 2012, After years of tireless advocacy, Dominic's law was passed in Michigan, a testament to the power of one man's determination to make a difference. This law, named in honor of the little boy whose life was tragically cut short, ushered in a new era of child protection in Michigan. It strengthened penalties for first- and second-degree child abuse, ensuring that those who harmed children would face the full consequences of their actions. It also created new penalties for individuals who committed abuse in the presence of another child, recognizing the profound and lasting impact such abuse can have on young witnesses. But the law went beyond simply increasing penalties. It also established new programs and initiatives aimed at preventing child abuse before it occurred. It mandated training for professionals who worked with children, equipping them with the knowledge and skills to identify and respond to signs of abuse. It provided funding for public awareness campaigns, educating communities about the signs of child abuse and empowering individuals to take action when they suspected a child was in danger. Dominic's law was a landmark achievement, a testament to the power of collective action and the unwavering determination of one man to honor his grandson's memory. It was a victory for child protection, a victory for justice, and a victory for Dominick Calhoun, whose short life had made a lasting impact on the world. This law became a model for other states, inspiring legislative reform across the nation. It demonstrated that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, hope could emerge. It showed that the voices of the voiceless could be heard, and that change was possible, even in the most challenging of circumstances. Rick Calhoun's tireless advocacy, his unwavering commitment to honoring Dominick's memory, had made a profound difference. He had transformed his grief into action, his pain into purpose. He had ensured that Dominick's legacy would live on, not just in the hearts of those who loved him, but in the laws that protected countless children from the horrors of abuse. Years passed, seasons changed. The world continued to spin, but for Dominick's family, time seemed to stand still. The pain of his loss remained as raw as ever, the wound refusing to heal. They carried the weight of his absence, the echoes of his laughter forever silenced. And then, in 2023, a new wave of grief washed over them. Corinne Baker, the mother who had failed to protect Dominic, the woman who had chosen her abuser over her own child, was granted parole. After serving just 13 years of her 13 to 30-year sentence, Corinne Baker was deemed eligible for release. The news struck the family like a thunderbolt, reopening old wounds and igniting a fresh wave of anger and disbelief. How could the woman who had played a role in Dominic's death, the woman who had failed to shield him from harm, be granted the freedom that had been so cruelly stolen from her son? The family fought tooth and nail against her release. They argued that she had not served sufficient time for her role in Dominic's death, that she had not demonstrated genuine remorse, and that she posed a potential risk to other children. They presented their case to the parole board, their voices filled with anguish and indignation. But their efforts were in vain. The parole board, citing Corinne's good behavior while incarcerated and her participation in rehabilitation programs, granted her parole. The decision was met with outrage and disbelief. They felt betrayed by the system, the very system that had failed to protect Dominic in the first place. They questioned how a mother who had allowed her child to be tortured to death could be deemed fit to re-enter society. They feared that she would harm another child, that the cycle of abuse would continue. This release reopened old wounds, rekindling the pain and anger that had never truly subsided. It was a stark reminder that justice, even when served, could not erase the past, could not bring Dominic back. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a cruel twist of fate that added insult to injury. Though devastated by the parole board's decision, the family vowed to continue their fight for justice. They pledged to honor Dominic's memory by advocating for stronger child protection laws and raising awareness about the insidious nature of child abuse. They would not let this release diminish their resolve. Instead, it would fuel their determination to ensure that no other child suffered the same fate as Dominic. This parole was a painful reminder that the wheels of justice often turn slowly, and that sometimes those who deserve punishment slip through the cracks. But it was also a reminder that the fight for justice never truly ends, that the voices of the voiceless must continue to be heard, and that the memory of those we have lost can inspire us to create a better world for those who remain. Dominic's legacy lived on, not just in the hearts of those who loved him, but in the ongoing struggle to protect children from abuse. His story, though filled with tragedy, served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could endure, and that the fight for justice, though arduous, was always worth fighting. This is a story that evokes a range of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief, and a profound sense of injustice. But Dominic's story is not just a tragedy, it's also a call to action. It's a wake-up call, a stark reminder that child abuse is a pervasive problem that affects communities across the globe. It's a call to arms, urging us to stand up and fight for the protection of our most vulnerable citizens, our children. This story reminds us that child abuse often hides in plain sight. It can occur in any family, in any neighborhood, regardless of socioeconomic status or cultural background. It's a silent epidemic, its victims often too young or too afraid to speak out. That's why it's crucial for each of us to be vigilant, to be aware of the signs of child abuse, and to be willing to speak up when we suspect a child is in danger. If you see something, say something. Don't hesitate to report your concerns to the authorities. It could be a neighbor's child, a friend's child, or even a child in your own family. Don't let fear or doubt prevent you from taking action. Your intervention could save a child's life. It could prevent another tragedy like Dominic's. This story also highlights the importance of supporting organizations and initiatives that work to prevent child abuse and provide assistance to victims. There are countless dedicated individuals and organizations working tirelessly to protect children, to educate communities, and to provide healing and support to those who have suffered abuse. By supporting these efforts, we can all contribute to creating a safer world for children. His legacy lives on, not just in the hearts of those who loved him, but in the ongoing fight to protect children from abuse. His story, though filled with tragedy, serves as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, and that the fight for justice, though arduous, is always worth fighting. We must never forget Dominick Calhoun. We must never forget the lessons learned from his tragic death. We must never stop fighting for the protection of our children. They are our future, our hope, our most precious resource. We owe it to them, and to Dominic, to create a world where every child is safe, loved, and cherished. If you suspect child abuse, please report it. You could save a life. You could prevent another tragedy. You could be the hero that a child desperately needs.